Hey, thank you for joining me. In this video, we're going to continue working on our BMW R90/6 custom bike project. So in the last one, you just watched me tear down the BMW, at least partially anyway, so that I could get started on the fabrication stuff, culminating and pulling the heads off the motor, which got them over here, and a couple things to point out. First off, right there, got a stripped hole, and that is for these studs. These are what hold the valve covers on. And unfortunately that one's stripped because clearly someone's been in the motor before. And well, this one doesn't look too bad. Now remember, this is a motor with 53,000 miles on it. That's not too bad looking. But then over here on the other side, clearly somebody recently honed this thing or something. You can see the cross hatching there. But in addition to that, there's some pitting, which you can actually feel with your finger, which is kind of unfortunate. Like right there. And elsewhere too. And I think somebody probably pulled at least this one cylinder off and re-ringed the thing. Maybe both sides, but it's hard to tell. One thing that the motor was experiencing was a lot of oil in the right-hand cylinder. Now, with these bikes, the crankcase breather goes into the right-hand carburetor, and so actually when you take a look at the valves, you can compare the two. This is my left cylinder head. You can see you've got the exhaust valve in this kind of like light tan, similar to the color of the spark plug. But over here, it's much darker, and that's because of all that oil it's burning up in that cylinder. Now, luckily, we're planning to replace all of that stuff. We're getting new 1000cc pistons and cylinders, and we're about to send the heads out to get that dual plug stuff I was talking about, as well as just, a general refresh, make sure everything is kosher. One thing that I did notice while I was kind of inspecting all of the parts is, so this is the rocker arm for the right-hand cylinder intake, and I don't know if this camera is going to focus on this or not. There we go. But there's a little bit of pitting there, which you can kind of see. A little hard to see on the camera, but it's there. So that is not an item that would normally be included with the head refresh, so we'll have to kind of price that into our build. So I'm going to have to remove these cylinders, take the pistons off the con rods, but before everything goes back together with the new parts, I'm going to make sure that I inspect and measure the cam, the lifters, the con rods, make sure everything in the bottom end is good to go before we put all of these expensive new parts back onto this thing. And of course, it's going to get a whole new paint job. One thing that we're also going to be doing is replacing this oil pan with one off of a later model. It's a little deeper, so it should alleviate some of these issues with the crankcase breather as well. I'm not going to pull the cylinders off just yet. I'm going to wait until I'm really ready to dig into that motor. So instead, I'm going to start mocking up this seat unit. You can see I put the tank back on to get an idea of kind of proportion. And to start, I'm going to pull out one of my bikes. This is my 1965 Harley Davidson Sportster. What I love about this thing is it's about as basic as a bike gets. It's magneto-fired, which means there's no need for a battery. It's kickstart only, so there's no electric start. You gotta crank it over yourself with your leg. And there's no extra frills, no turn signals on this thing because of its age. And the reason that I pulled this thing out today is because this seat is pretty close to what I imagine is going to go on our BMW project. So I'm going to take this thing off. It's not exactly the nicest piece of leather work, but it'll serve for mock-up. I think this looks pretty similar to what I have pictured in my head. So I'm going to go ahead and use this seat as a template to make a new one. You can see this piece of flat bar that I drilled out. This functions as a placeholder for the new rear shocks we're going to have made. So I'm going to eventually rebuild that top mount with something else a little bit stronger, but it's going to sit something like that. The back end of this will probably come down a little bit, but I think that looks pretty cool. I have my paper template cut out. Now I'm going to transfer it onto a piece of steel. You can see the piece I'm using here is pretty hefty. Usually you can buy one of these seat pans pre-made for like $35 online. The reason that I'm not going to do that is because on this particular bike, you're going to be able to see the underside pretty clearly because there's no frame down here for it to hide against. And you can see that there's a bunch of studs that I'm not going to be using since there's no frame for these to attach to. So I'm going to make my own. So it's a little bit cleaner, a little nicer looking. I picked this piece of metal up from the metal supply shop thinking this is a piece of 10 gauge, a little thicker than what's used normally. That's 12 gauge. But I think this is actually 3mm plate, which you can see 3mm, roughly 1/8 of an inch thick. Well, I have a thick piece of steel, some lines drawn on it, leather bag, and a bunch of hammers. We'll see if we can make this a shape. A bunch of hammering later, I have something that kind of looks like a seat, at least starting to. This one's a lot bigger than the one that I'm kind of basing it off of over here. And that's because I want this to kind of match the frame rail width. So it's going to be a little wider. We've got the front half in like a good spot. So now I'm going to work on giving this like a kick or a dish so that the person riding the bike stays in place. Well, the shape is getting there. You can see I've made some marks. I'm going to trim it up a little bit. I want to make it a little shapelier. If there's one piece of advice I can give you, it's don't be afraid to cut stuff up or try it again if it doesn't work the first time, because that didn't do it. So I'll continue, give it a little bit more of a shape. And that's the seat pan just about done. Now, obviously I could have saved a lot of time and effort just using an off-the-shelf piece like this, but this one's sized a little bit differently. It's a little bit larger, a little bit wider to kind of fit that frame. And so in the end, I think this is the right call. With the seat pan mocked up, I got to start thinking about how I'm going to attach it to the bike. So I've got this cardboard template of a shape that I think is kind of nice. I know I said I was going to machine something, but I'm thinking I'll just build it out of some 1/4-inch plate or something and weld it all together. I'm thinking 2 pieces side by side, a little plate to bridge between them, and holes underneath that will bolt to some threaded inserts on the underside of the seat pan. Should look clean and will give me a way to hide the wiring for the taillights that will come later. I've cut out a couple pieces of 1/4-inch plate that I just had kicking around, some flat bar. Drew my template there. I'm going to weld these together so that when I cut it out on the bandsaw, they'll be the same size. So went ahead and drilled the rest of the holes and then cleaned up the parts, as you can see. Now I'm going to figure out how wide I want to make it. So I've got a couple pieces of scrap material, and I'll see which one works better. And that kind of overhangs either side. It's kind of cool, a little wider. I got this guy. That's pretty much right on the money there width-wise. There's that tube. I don't know, what do you guys think? I'm gonna go with the wider one. Even after angle grinding this entire piece, it can still smell like oil. I'll have to clean this with a little acetone after I tack it. My amperage is a little on the low side for this material too. You can see the bottom piece is picking up a bit. This is no longer at 90 degrees. You can see there that it's pulled towards where the weld is. So we'll have to fix that up. I got the majority of the welding finished on that piece under the seat. You can see here, I'm just letting that cool down now. In the meantime, I made up this little bit. It's pretty much just a piece of tubing that I've ovaled out with a hammer and tacked onto this piece of plate that just so happens to be the right size to go on the end of that mount. What I'm going to be doing here is, since that's an oval and now that's an oval, this should slide right in there, and then I can weld it in place. I might not use this exact piece. This is kind of thin, but then again, so is that tube. So I might make a different part, but for mock-up, this is working pretty well. I might actually end up remaking this guy too. We'll see. I'm not super crazy about how that looks, but you might grow on me. All right, we've got it tacked together, so time to see how it looks. Okay. Not too shabby. Here's the seat pan. Got this piece of flat stock that will get welded onto the underside. We're going to have threaded pieces in here so that we can bolt the seat to this mount. For now, let's see how it looks. I gotta say, I'm really happy with that. Yeah, I'm digging how it came out. You can just barely see the mount underneath the seat at standing height, but then when you get down, take a close look, I think that looks pretty sharp. That's going to be it for this video. Thank you for coming along for the ride. If you have any questions or comments, please add them below. I know there's 1,000 ways that I could have done this differently, some of which could have been faster, easier, better, safer. But I'm working with the tools that I have here in the shop, and you should never let your limits dictate your creativity. That's what design's all about. So stick around. I'll keep it up with the videos. There's a lot more coming, including a cool little surprise for the motor. This little box contains a new set of pistons and cylinders, so you'll see those soon. Anyway, thanks a lot, and I'll see you around.